we were able to do some target share research, and we found some interesting things. Target share is particularly important in Dynasty because, again, we're playing in half PPR or full PPR leagues, most of us. And so when you're evaluating targets and target share, you're talking about a direct correlation to receptions, which is where you get the majority of your points on productive Dynasty and fantasy football teams. And so let's look at some guys in this research that we were able to find that stood out to us. Let's start with Trey McBride. Trey McBride obviously being drafted now much higher than he was before. 4th, 5th round a lot of times in Dynasty startup drafts. He was fairly impressive last year as well, but I think people don't realize how impressive he was. This is why we've been okay. At first, I was like, with Trey McBride's price, I was like, I'm not really sure if I'm buying into him at that price. But then the more I've kind of dug into it and the more his price has actually kind of settled, I've been okay with it for this reason.
It took a while for me to grow on him too.
Trey McBride, and keep in mind, Kyler Murray only played, half the season last year? A little more than half?
Yeah, I think it was just about half, yeah.
Trey McBride had 106 targets last year. That was good for 19.1% of the total targets in that offense. So 555 total targets in that offense. He had 106 of them again. So we're calculating target share. We're including games that players didn't play. So it's a percentage of overall targets. And so 19% of all the targets on the season went to Trey McBride. And again, this was on a limited passing volume, 555 attempts when you're looking at how that stacks up compared to the rest of the NFL. It's like 21st, I think. And so when you're talking about what the Cardinals could potentially do this year with Kyler Murray historically has actually passed the ball a fair amount from a volume standpoint compared to some other rushing quarterbacks. And when you're also looking at some of the production we've seen from tight ends that have played with Kyler Murray, it's been really good. A good example of this is Zach Ertz. And Zach Ertz is a guy that obviously now isn't super relevant because he's old and he's also on the Commanders. Zach Ertz never did get a full season in with Kyler. He got the season he was traded, then he had 10 games, then he had 7 games. But even looking at his 10-game season in 2022, he had 69 targets.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. That year. And so when you're doing the math, he was on track for over 110 targets that year himself. Kyler Murray has shown that when he's healthy and when his tight end is healthy, he will throw to his tight end. And I don't think there's going to be any exception here with Trey McBride, who I think is as good a talent tight end as Kyler Murray has played with. And so when you're talking about his ability and his willingness to lean on his tight ends, when you talk about McBride developing as a player, when you talk about that offense altogether, hopefully coming along and throwing the ball a little bit more, Trey McBride is somebody that could end up being extremely productive this year. When you're looking at percentage of overall targets, yes, Travis Kelce was hurt. Travis Kelce's percentage of overall targets of Patrick Mahomes, 635 targets, was 19.05%. And yes, he had more targets than Trey McBride. But that being said, Trey McBride, this is going to be his 3rd year in the league. I mean, he's a guy that when you're talking about from a dynasty standpoint, when we're talking about these young tight ends, they're going to be relevant for 12 more years probably. And Trey McBride is no exception to that. I think he's going to be able to stay healthy. I think he's going to be durable. I think he's going to bring in a lot of targets. And because of that, I think he's going to be a very valuable asset in your tight end premium leagues. My guess is the win rate for your dynasty team with Trey McBride on it is going to be one of the highest of tight ends because, again, I think Kyler is going to heavily rely on him, even with Marvin Harrison Jr. there. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. helps Trey McBride. I mean, you put in a very talented X receiver. You don't think the tight end is going to thrive in the middle of the field? I would guess he will. So Trey McBride, again, Hollywood Brown last year, 18% of the targets. Rondale Moore, 11. There's also a good amount of targets that were in the category of non-fantasy relevant players. 41.08% of the targets that were of the whole year last year went to somebody that was not fantasy relevant. That means there are a lot of targets to even pull from. You're going to see Marvin Harrison Jr. pull from that category, and I think you're going to see Trey McBride. I think this offense is going to be better from a fantasy standpoint, and so I think the top heaviness of those two assets on that team will definitely lend itself to both of them being productive this year, making Trey McBride a fairly decent value because when you've seen you draft tight ends, the value inflation over a multi-year period is good. And so Trey McBride, I would definitely be keeping an eye on him from a dynasty standpoint because if he does produce like he should this year, his value is obviously going to go up. So
yeah, it definitely will. And another guy that we think, I don't know how much further his value can go up just because of how the dynasty community is with, old assets, because apparently AJ Brown is old and he's a league winner and he has a 27% target share and he's an alpha dominant wide receiver. And he just got another extension that makes him, again, the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. Did people forget that? Was that just news that was kind of brushed under the rug because of all the other stuff that was going on? Like, did we miss something? Because honestly, like in fairness, I want to be agreeable here and say, like, I was on the fence with AJ Brown going into this offseason.
He was bad at the end of the season.
He was bad at the end of the season, so were the Eagles as a whole.
Yes.
And he wasn't as consistent as he was in the early half when he was being considered as potentially the dynasty wide receiver 2 or 3 overall because he was that dominant. And I looked ahead towards the offseason and I was like, you know what? He's hitting that age where people start freaking out in Dynasty.
True.
And he's going to start losing some value. And I started recommending to people that maybe you might want to consider pivoting off of AJ Brown. And if they did at that point in time, it was the correct move because his value then is not what his value is now. You are now getting AJ Brown at the beginning or middle of the 3rd round in your Dynasty Superflex startups. I did not expect that. I did not anticipate. Well, I did anticipate it, but it still blows me away when he got a contract that when he got such a nice extension. Seriously, like did you expect that?
Highest pay. No, but I don't think he's not deserving of it either. Like in terms of, I mean, here's a really good sign for AJ Brown as he moves into, yes, the latter half of his career. But AJ Brown is going to be productive for at least 3 more years, and we play Dynasty in 3-year windows, right? Yards per reception in 2022 was 17.0. Yards per reception in 2023 was 13.7. So you saw it go down a whole 3.5 yards there. And when you're looking at the fantasy points per game, only deviated by about half a point. That means he was able to lose 4 touchdowns on the season, but he went from 88 receptions to 106 receptions. So he gained 18 receptions there.
Yeah.
Like, and not to mention the targets, he had 12 more targets. So honestly, in terms of AJ Brown and what I want to see from him long term, I liked 2023 better than I liked 2022.
Yeah.
Yes, he scored a few more fantasy points in 2022, but the sustainability of 2023, especially with the direction that Jalen Hurts and that offense has kind of moved, like not near as good as they were when Shane Steichen was there. That gives me hope, and honestly, it makes me want to buy even more. You're talking about a wide receiver averaging 17 points per game, and you're getting him in the 3rd round of your dynasty leagues.
Easy. Smash.
And he just got the best contract. He's got the best value insulation. He's got some of the best production. He's on one of the best offenses.
And he's just now entering his prime. A 27, 28-year-old wide receiver.
That's his prime.
That is the prime of a wide receiver. When they are at the peak of their athletic ability and they really can't get any smarter as a talent.
Exactly. You have enough experience to where you know the ins and outs of the NFL and NFL defenses, but you also aren't old enough to where you're falling off from an athletic and from a physical standpoint. Yes, exactly. I totally agree with that. And AJ Brown, again, we drafted him in the 3rd round of our Platinum League, and we were very happy with that value.
Yeah, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah. And honestly, like it's stuff like that. It's the Platinum League. It's the team blueprint. It's all that you get when you go to flockfantasy.com/domain. When you use code domain, choose another Flocker tier, you automatically get a team blueprint. You unlock one of these, but you get a ton of other things as well. You get one-on-one access to Nathan and I. You get our ADP database. You get our Discord community. You get our exclusive articles and videos. Again, we host all of our, we do our videos. We record them once a week. We put them on YouTube. Hooray. But we spend our week on our Discord. And so if you want to be a part of the community where we spend our time and also join over 600 other people that play Dynasty that are invested in this and also want to win their leagues to win money because money is cool, flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain, choose Mother Flocker, and you get all of that. But moving on here, the next guy on this list is going to be Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle is a guy that is a wide receiver 2 on his team. And when you're talking about where he's going in Dynasty startups, I do agree that Jalen Waddle needs to be going behind the wide receiver 1s in decent offenses.
Yes,
for sure.
Completely agree.
That can be true while also acknowledging that offense, number 1, is very good for fantasy football, and that Jalen Waddle, from a target perspective, still grabbed 18.5% of all available targets last year in that offense. And when you're looking at where he falls into those kind of ranges we talked about with the targets, he is trending towards that team leader, low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, if he gets even more targets. And remember, this does not take into account injury. And so that's his percentage of the total targets. That's the whole season. So that's not even just the games he was available. So when you're doing just the games he was available, that number is a little bit higher. But that being said, availability is key. And Jalen Waddle, that's one of the biggest questions for him. Can he stay on the field? Can he stay healthy? Can he stay off the injury report every week? And that's a huge thing for your dynasty team, because if you can't start Jalen Waddle, then why even roster him? The idea behind this one is that with the target share that he's pulling right now behind Tyreek Hill, it gives him a path to be fantasy relevant and dynasty relevant as a consequence of that this year. but also for really the next 5-6 years. Because let's talk about when Jalen Waddle's entering his prime. You talk about 27, 28 years old entering his prime. I think Jalen Waddle's 25 now or 24. I mean, he's going to be entering his prime or in his prime when Tyreek Hill is done.
Out. Yeah.
And so this is a guy that when he's in his prime, you could be getting upwards of 17 points per game from Jalen Waddle when he is the number one wide receiver there. And yes, they're going to bring somebody in when Tyreek Hill retires. But that being said, he's this guy that's been 15.5 points, 14 points last year because he only played in 14 games. But he was on track, had he played all of his games, to average around 15 points a game. And that's pretty much as a wide receiver too, as a rookie, and then 2 years as a wide receiver too. That's good.
Talk about a pretty safe asset to target, especially when you're more on the rebuild side in your league. If you want to go get a guy that you know is more likely than not going to increase in value within the next couple of years, and you know you're going to be rebuilding for a couple of years, you know by the time you're looking at contending, you've got a value win when you invested in Jalen Waddle compared to when you previously did, and you have a potential to even trade or move off him when the hype really increases once Tyreek Hill is out of that offense, because we know for a fact that Tyreek Hill isn't going to be around as long as Jalen Waddle is. And that's a fact.
And again, I mean, one of the main reasons we're targeting, looking at targets instead of overall fantasy points or any other metric is because targets are typically pretty insulated.
Yes.
We talk about value being insulated, but if you want to insulate production as much as you can, you go to targets. Targets are typically player dependent, and so that means the best players are going to draw the most targets. Anybody who's good at drawing targets, like Devontae Adams is a good example of this. Drawing as many targets as he did in Green Bay, went to a new system. Bad quarterback, Derek Carr, bad quarterback, bad situation, still got
30+%.
Still got 30+% target share. Again, it's insulated. And so when you're looking at a case-by-case basis, like which players are going to withstand the test of time, Jalen Waddle is a good example because he's getting a good target share as a wide receiver too. And so again, the ceiling for him situationally is still very, very high.
Yeah, and don't overlook him. That's what this video is titled. Don't overlook these dynasty assets. Like, this isn't a hard buys video. We've done that plenty of times.
Should we put ourselves on the thumbnail?
And should we put ourselves... Keep an eye on this asset and make sure that he doesn't fall too far in your dynasty drafts, because we know how much value fluctuates in dynasty fantasy football. There's a chance that if Jalen Waddle does continue to decrease in value, that you could go and capitalize on that opportunity in the future. Chris Godwin is another guy here where... Look, he wasn't as productive as I thought he was going to be last year, but he got the target share that I expected, and that was 22% target share, which was just under Mike Evans, who had way, way more fantasy points to his name than Chris Godwin was. And you know what it was? It was a big playability, and it was the touchdowns. Chris Godwin got like none of them, and Mike Evans got all of them. Classic Mike Evans. This is what happens. He kind of seems like an ageless wonder at this point.
He is.
But look, I'm going to continue to bet on the target share of Chris Godwin that you're not getting with any other receiver really going in his range at price, because he's still very affordable. He's still very cheap. Is he a smashing hard buy? Not necessarily, because he's an acquired taste. He's getting on the older side of his career, and there are legitimate questions with, can he ever actually outproduce Mike Evans? Because he never has since he had that wide receiver 2 overall season. And he has struggled with with injuries in the past. But last year was a very unique year, right? You've got it's the Dave Canales year, it's Baker Mayfield's resurgence, it's him getting a bunch of opportunity and just not able to turn it into a lot of fantasy points. And that is partially just due to the type of wide receiver that he plays in that offense, right? He's more of the short to intermediate game target. He's the guy that they're throwing it to on third and short opportunity. He's their third down guy, but he's not their let's take a shot downfield guy. And for some reason, taking the shots downfield just always worked in the favor of Mike Evans, and Baker Mayfield was actually executing, throwing the ball downfield.
Right.
Now, is that going to work this year with Dave Canales gone? Is Baker Mayfield going to take a step down? I personally would assume so. And I think that actually kind of works in the favor of Chris Godwin being more productive than he was last year, especially with his target opportunity. Like, his target opportunity is probably going to be what it has been historically, and that is in the 20% range. So again, like, let me just reinforce, if you're looking for a guy that you can comfortably put into your flex every single week, especially as a contender, this is a guy that you don't want to overlook. And this is a guy that is very cheap, very affordable. You don't have to break the bank to go acquire a guy that can be a contending asset for you that has longevity still, and that is Chris Godwin. Any other contract?
All right, this next guy here, he was 6th in targets in the entire league last year. He was 9th in target share. He was 13th in target rate. He was 9th in route run. He was 1st in route participation.
So that guy's got to be a guy who's being drafted like top
5 rounds.
5 rounds, right?
Yeah. 11th in air yards, right?
Right.
6th in receptions. 13th in receiving yards. 11th in touchdowns, actually.
Wow.
13th in fantasy points per game. 13th in yards after catch. 8th in unrealized air yards. He had almost 900 unrealized air yards. And you can get Stephon Diggs in the 7th or 8th round.
Whoa.
And yes.
Oh my.
There are red flags attached to Stephon Diggs' profile right now.
Yes.
We acknowledge that. Let's look at the efficiency here. He was 31st in yards per route run this year. That is not good. He was 62nd in yards per target. He was 77th in yards per reception. He was 20th in yards per team pass attempt. Like none of those numbers jump off the page or make you like, okay, Stephon Diggs is some hidden gem. Is Stephon Diggs on the way down in his career? Yeah, sure, he is. But is Stephon Diggs in the bottom half of what are his productive years? Like, is he going to like keep decreasing down this slope that you saw at the end of last year? I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that. I mean, for a couple of reasons. Look at the last 3 weeks that he played. Playing against some decent corners as well. Jalen Ramsey, L'Jarius Sneed, Joey Porter. And he was able to be a top 2 or a wide receiver 2 or higher in all 3 of those games. Okay? So and yes, granted, some of those were playoff games, but when you're looking at some of the regular season finishes here at the end, 55th, 53rd, 45th, 52nd, 15th, 53rd, 53rd. And so obviously he had a really rough stretch of games there. But let's focus a little bit on the context behind that, because do remember that the Buffalo Bills switched their offensive coordinator midseason. Do remember that Josh Allen did not look like Josh Allen a lot last year. Do remember that Stephon Diggs, until Dalton Kincaid came on at the end of the season, really didn't have another receiver there to where the defense had to pay attention enough to where Stephon Diggs had some space to work. Teams were able to hound Stephon Diggs, and it was successful.
And they had to play the ground pound game.
And it's why you saw them switch. Yeah. And honestly, Buffalo really didn't fix their problem, because they went out and got Keon Coleman. They have Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid's good enough and lines up at a good enough spot to where I think he's going to be able to overcome this to some extent. But in the reality of it is, the context behind the situation in which Stephon Diggs found himself in last year, it should be taken into account. And it doesn't mean that Stephon Diggs is going to come out and be a top 12 wide receiver this year. I don't know if he will. I don't think I'd bet that he will. But top 24, I would bet that he will. I would bet that he's going to be a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football. And right now, he's cheaper than that. You're not ranking him when you're ranking dynasty wide receivers. You're not ranking him in the top 24 of your rankings. You're not even putting him really. I mean, where's he even ranked at in keep trade cut? Wide receiver 40. Wide receiver 40. Again, a guy that was top 10 in most opportunity share metrics, receptions, yards, touchdowns, all of it. Wide receiver 40.
Christian Kirk, Cooper Kupp, Christian Watson, all wide receivers that have plenty of their own questions as well. And honestly, if you're going to bet on one of those guys to be productive this year, I bet on the one that had just a 27% target share last year, which is a dominant alpha wide receiver 1 and is playing with CJ Stroud. Look, I get the competition is a question with Nico Collins, with Tank Dell, even Dalton Schultz. Like, I get it. That's why he's not valued as high as we think he could possibly be. But let me tell you this. I'd be a lot lower on Stephon Diggs if he were still in Buffalo going into 2024 than he is in Houston, because of what Buffalo is doing with their offense schematically. They changed their scheme with their new offensive coordinator last year, which was a lot more ground and pound. And you're going to see that this year especially. They're not going to have a Stephon Diggs in that offense. It's clear. They just told us that in the draft this year. It's not going to look the same. Now, an air raid offense like CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans.
I was going to ask you this question. Answer honestly.
Yes.
For fantasy purposes, would you rather have Josh Allen as Stephon Diggs QB or CJ Stroud as Stephon Diggs QB?
CJ Stroud 100%. It's not even a question.
It's not a question. He's in a better situation for fantasy.
Yeah, and for me, like, again,
yes, there's more target competition.
Yes, more target competition. We keep admitting that there's absolutely risk, given what Stephon Diggs didn't do at the end of 2023, going into a new situation, a new offense with no experience with any of these players. But let me tell you this. Let's play hypothetical. Let's play a scenario thing here, okay? Everyone's assuming that Stephon Diggs being on technically a 1-year deal with Houston means that he doesn't have a ton of long-term value and he's going to fall off a cliff after this year.
Correct.
So he's a contending piece only, and he is older. So yes. Granted, that is correct. What if Stephon Diggs is the lead wide receiver in Houston after this year? What if Stephon Diggs gets an extension in Houston after this year? Are we rethinking everything that we're assuming right now in the middle of 2024?
Yes.
Because it is not outside the range of possibilities that Houston decides to go and pay Stephon Diggs for a couple more years tied to CJ Stroud.
Why would they do that?
That maintains his value going into 2025. Why would they do that? Because Stephon Diggs is actually the proven alpha wide receiver 1. And he has been historically.
And he's not necessarily out of his prime years. We only saw one bad half of a year.
Guys, but he dropped the ball in the playoffs.
If the Texans think they have a Super Bowl window, you bet your bridges they're going to sign a receiver like Stephon Diggs.
Yes.
Like, absolutely they will.
You saw Arizona do it with D-Hop.
I know. And now, granted, it could be the complete opposite. Stephon Diggs could fall off, and he could be irrelevant. But again, where are you getting him at in Dynasty Leagues? Wide receiver 40 prices. You're getting him around guys like Nathan mentioned, Cooper Kupp, Christian Kirk, DeAndre Swift. Like, again, if you're contending for a Dynasty championship, Stephon Diggs is somebody you have to have on your roster.
Yeah.
So
Alvin Kamara is going to be our last guy here. I know it's not a wide receiver. It's kind of a different story here, but the target share alone. Holy crap. Like when you want to see rush or receiving upside from a wide receiver or from a running back, you're like 8 to 10%. Like you want to see around the 10% target share opportunity. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, a premier receiving back who has a lot of yards after the catch, opportunity and ability, and he gets 11% target share last year. That's good. We're considering him an elite top 3 dynasty running back because of what he could do in the future.
Yep.
Alvin Kamara, 14%. Okay, and that's not like abnormal for Alvin Kamara. He's always been doing this. And he's not going to stop doing this. Like, this isn't a situation in New Orleans where we're looking at it and saying, hey, this is going to look like a completely different offense in 2024. They're stuck with Derek Carr. And they're stuck with Alvin Kamara. They can't move off of him because they keep kicking the can down the road, and they owe him just as much money if they cut him as if they just kept him on the roster. What do you think they're going to do? They're probably going to keep throwing him the ball because Derek Carr refuses to take shots downfield.
And the Saints refuse to get a different quarterback than Derek Carr.
Spencer Rattler. I mean, come on. I don't care if Spencer Rattler start next year. Alvin Kamara is going to be just as productive.
It wouldn't change anything. A young quarterback that doesn't have a ton of experience and also doesn't have a ton of skill, like from a moving the ball down the field standpoint, definitely going to throw it to a running back.
Yeah. It's pretty clear cut and dry here with Alvin Kamara. It's a great situation that hasn't changed.
And you're getting him so cheap. Alvin Kamara, I mean, you're paying maybe a second for him. Because he's the running back 28.
Look, if Kendre Miller is going to be the biggest guy here that's breathing down his neck, I understand he has day 2 draft capital. I understand he is going to get an opportunity at some point in time.
Fair.
Has Alvin Kamara's production ever been dependent on the amount of carries that he gets in that offense? No. Kendre Miller can get an increased workload in that offense while Alvin Kamara is still productive. It's just 1 year. It's just 1 year. We can talk about 2025 later, but you're talking about a veteran running back who is very cheap, very affordable, and can help you win a championship this year with a 14% target share.
It's sometimes just too easy. Especially for contending teams. And again, we're trying. The goal behind all of this is to win our dynasty leagues, right? And now we're moving towards you're getting these veterans as cheap as you're going to get them right now in the offseason. So, all right, do us a huge favor.
Don't overlook these assets.
No, don't overlook them. All right, make sure you drop a like on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you play Dynasty. Like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. If you want to get a team blueprint, get in our leagues, get our exclusive content, all of it's over there. We'd love to see you over there with us. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.